The first signal was dismissed as interference. That was the mistake. Not a catastrophic one. Not immediately. Just the kind of small mistake people make when they think they understand the world. Which, most days, they do. Most days. The drill stopped suddenly. Not gradually. Not from where. Not because it struck rock. 1 second it was operating normally. The next. Nothing. The machine simply shut itself down. Jake Harrison pulled off his hearing protection and stared at the control panel. Not again. The other miners weren't concerned. Equipment failed all the time. Especially in Coober Pedy. Dust got everywhere. Heat destroyed electronics. Vibration loosened connections. There was always something. Probably the power regulator. Someone laughed. Someone else nodded. Jake wasn't convinced. The drill wasn't broken. The readings all looked normal. Every system reported green. Every sensor reported operational. Yet the machine refused to continue. That was strange enough. Then the speakers activated. A soft tone echoed through the tunnel. Everyone looked up. The tone repeated. 3 short pulses. Pause. 3 more. Silence. The miners exchanged confused glances. What was that? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. The speaker should have been inactive. There was no alert. No warning. No system message. Just the sound. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Then nothing. The tunnel fell silent again. Jake walked to the equipment rack. Checked every diagnostic screen. No faults. No alarms. No explanation. Eventually they restarted the drill. Everything appeared normal. For exactly 17 minutes. Then it happened again. The drill shut down. The speakers activated. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Silence. This time nobody laughed. Because it was clearly connected. The question was, connected to what? The mine extended through ancient rock buried beneath Central Australia. Opal fields. Sedimentary layers. Millions of years of geological history. None of those things should have been producing signals. Yet something was. Jake reviewed system logs. Then power logs. Then communications logs. Nothing. No external response. No transmission source. No explanation. The signal should not have existed. And somehow, that made it impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, the drill crew had documented 7 events. Each identical. Each occurring when the equipment reached a specific depth. 512 meters. Every time. The number bothered Jake. Not because it was unusual. Because it was precise. Random failures drifted. Changed. Varied. This didn't. 512 meters. Exactly. Every time. The next morning he returned early. Before the others arrived. Before operations resumed. The mine was quiet. The tunnels empty. Only the distant hum of ventilation systems echoed through the underground passages. Jake reached the drill platform. Checked the systems. Reviewed the logs again. Nothing new. Then he noticed something. A file. Not large. Not hidden. Just present. Created at exactly the same moment the signal appeared. Every time. He opened the newest one. The screen filled with symbols. Rows of characters. Patterns. Sequences. Not corrupted data. Not random errors. Organized. Structured. Intentional. Jake stared at the screen. A chill creeping up his spine. Because for the first time, the possibility entered his mind. The signal wasn't being generated by the drill. The drill was receiving it. Far beneath the Australian desert. Beneath millions of years of stone. Something had transmitted a message. And somehow, the mine had just answered. Jake didn't tell anyone about the file. Not immediately. That wasn't because he wanted to hide it. It was because he wanted to understand it first. The symbols occupied nearly 300 lines, each sequence grouped into repeating blocks. Some were short, some stretched across the screen. But none of them looked random. That was the problem. Corrupted data looked chaotic. Broken files looked chaotic. Interference looked chaotic. This looked deliberate. Jake sat alone in the control room for almost an hour, reading, comparing, searching for patterns. Eventually he noticed something strange. The newest file wasn't identical to the previous one. At first glance it appeared the same. Then he compared them line by line. Tiny differences. Small changes. A few symbols added here. A few removed there. The changes weren't random. The file was evolving. His stomach tightened. Because that implied something he wasn't ready to admit. The signal wasn't repeating. The signal was changing. And if it was changing, something was responding. The rest of the crew arrived shortly afterward. The normal morning routine began. Equipment checks, safety briefings, coffee, complaints. Life underground resumed. Jake almost convinced himself he'd imagined the importance of the discovery. Then the drill reached 512 meters again. The machine stopped instantly. The speakers activated. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Silence. The entire tunnel froze. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody even spoke. Because everyone knew exactly what was about to happen. The computer screen flashed. A new file appeared. Created automatically, just like before. Jake opened it immediately. Several miners crowded around behind him. The file contained symbols. Rows and rows of symbols. And once again, the contents had changed. A murmur moved through the room. What is that? No idea. Can anyone read it? Jake already knew the answer. No. Nobody could. Yet the longer he stared at it, the more convinced he became that it was trying to be read. That afternoon they called in specialists. Not because of the symbols. Because of the depth. Every incident occurred at exactly the same point underground. Which meant there had to be something there. A geological feature. A cavity. A fault line. Something. Ground-penetrating scans began before sunset. The first results arrived just after dark. And that's when things got worse. The scans found an anomaly. Not large. Not dramatic. Just a region roughly 20 meters beyond the drill face. Perfectly smooth. Every surrounding rock layer looked natural, ancient, uneven, compressed by geological forces. The anomaly didn't. Its shape was too regular. Too uniform. Too precise. Jake stared at the display. That's not rock. Nobody disagreed. Because it didn't resemble any formation they had ever seen. One technician ran the scan again. Different angle. Different frequency. Same result. A smooth surface hidden deep beneath Australia. Waiting directly beyond the drill path. The room became very quiet. Someone finally asked the question everyone was thinking. What if that's where the signal is coming from? Nobody answered. Because there was no obvious alternative anymore. The anomaly sat exactly where the signal appeared. Exactly where the files were generated. Exactly where the drill kept stopping. The coincidence was becoming difficult to defend. Jake stayed late reviewing the newest file. Hours passed. The mine emptied. Workers headed home. Machines shut down. Eventually only ventilation fans remained. Their distant hum echoing through the tunnels. The file remained open on his monitor. Rows of symbols. Silent. Unchanging. Then one of them moved. Jake froze. A single symbol near the center of the file shifted position. Not visually. The file itself updated. One character changed. Then another. Jake's heart started pounding. The timestamp refreshed automatically. No one else was logged into the system. No one else was connected. Yet the file was still changing. In real time. A second symbol appeared. Then a third. The screen updated again. Slowly. Deliberately. As if something was typing. Not quickly. Not efficiently. Carefully. Jake's hand moved toward the keyboard. Then stopped. Because suddenly, a thought occurred to him. The file wasn't being rewritten. It was being continued. The same way a person continued writing a sentence. The same way a conversation continued after a reply. For several long seconds he simply stared. Watching the symbols grow. Watching the message expand. And slowly, very slowly, a terrible realization settled into place. The signal wasn't reacting to the drill. The drill had only uncovered it. Whatever was sending the message, whatever sat 20 meters beyond the tunnel, had been there before they arrived, before the mine, before anyone knew it existed. And now, for the first time in a very long time, it had noticed that someone was listening. The specialists arrived 2 days later. That alone was unusual. Normally, requests moved slowly. Paperwork, approvals, schedules. Mining operations dealt with delays all the time. This time, the response had been immediate. Too immediate. Jake noticed it the moment the vehicles arrived. Geologists, signal analysts, engineers, even a university researcher from Adelaide. Nobody said exactly why they had come. But everyone wore the same expression. Curiosity. The file had been forwarded. The scans had been reviewed. And somebody, somewhere, had decided it was worth investigating. The team gathered inside the underground control room. A large display showed the anomaly behind the drill face. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly curved. The image looked wrong even after 3 days. Like someone had cut a shape into reality. A geologist named Rachel stepped closer, studying the scan. That's not natural. The room went quiet. Jake folded his arms. How sure are you? She didn't hesitate. Completely. A pause. Rock doesn't form like that. Another scan appeared beside the first. Different frequency, different angle. Same result. The structure remained unchanged. Smooth. Uniform. Precise. Someone muttered quietly. It looks manufactured. Nobody disagreed. Because that was becoming harder to avoid. The signal analysts focused on the files. Thousands of symbols by now. Pages and pages of structured sequences. Nothing translated. Nothing matched any known language. But every expert reached the same conclusion. It wasn't noise. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't random. It was information. The only question was, information from what? That afternoon they resumed drilling. Very carefully. Every sensor active. Every camera recording. The drill moved forward. Slowly. The tunnel filled with the familiar sound of machinery. Dust. Vibration. Normality. At least for a while. 512 meters. The drill stopped instantly. The speakers activated. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Silence. Everyone looked toward the display. Waiting. A new file appeared. The timestamp updated. Then, something unexpected happened. A second file appeared immediately afterward. Nobody had seen that before. Jake opened both. The first contained the usual sequences. The second contained only 6 symbols. 6. Nothing more. The room stared. Rachel leaned closer. Was that there before? No. Jake shook his head. Never. The symbols sat alone on an otherwise empty page. Simple. Compact. Deliberate. One of the analysts frowned. Compare it. Jake loaded the older files. Hours passed. Searching. Cross-checking. Then somebody found it. The 6-symbol sequence already existed. Buried deep inside every previous file. Always in the same position. Always repeated. The room suddenly felt smaller. Because repetition meant importance. Importance meant purpose. And purpose implied intention. The 6-symbol sequence appeared everywhere. Like a signature. Or a marker. Or a name. Nobody said the word out loud. But everyone thought it. The speaker crackled unexpectedly. The room jumped. Not the usual pulses. Something else. A longer tone. Sustained. Holding. The computers reacted instantly. New windows opened automatically. Data poured across the screens. Dozens of files updating simultaneously. Jake moved toward the keyboard. Then stopped. Every update was synchronized. Not random. Not malfunction. The timing was perfect. Whatever generated the signal was coordinating everything. The realization sent a chill through the room. Rachel looked up. Can it see us? Nobody answered. Because there was no way to know. Then the tunnel lights flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times. Silence followed. The speakers remained quiet. The drill remained still. And for a moment, everything felt suspended. Waiting. Then the monitor beside Jake flashed. A single line appeared. Not symbols. Not code. A diagram. Simple. Clean. A side profile of the tunnel. The drill. The miners. The anomaly. Every element positioned correctly. The room froze. The diagram wasn't perfect. But it was accurate. Accurate enough. Rachel stared at it. That's us. Nobody argued. Because the image clearly showed the tunnel. Clearly showed the equipment. Clearly showed the people inside it. The signal hadn't just been transmitting. It had been observing. The display updated again. The tunnel profile expanded. The anomaly became larger. More detailed. The smooth curved shape resolved further. And that's when they saw it. Not a wall. Not a structure. A boundary. The edge of something enormous. Far bigger than the scans had initially suggested. The visible section extended downward. Upward. Outward. Beyond the limits of detection. The anomaly wasn't a buried object. The anomaly was part of a buried system. A very large one. The display updated one final time. A new marker appeared. Directly ahead of the drill. 20 meters away. A perfect circle. Centered on the structure. Highlighted. Waiting. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Because the implication was obvious. The signal wasn't warning them away. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't resisting. The marker sat there like an instruction. Or an invitation. And deep beneath the Australian desert, something was waiting for them to dig a little further. Nobody slept much that night. Not the miners. Not the engineers. Not the scientists. Because 20 meters suddenly felt very close. For days the anomaly had existed only on screens. Only as data. Only as theories. Now, there was a marker. A location. A destination. And everyone knew what came next. The morning briefing lasted less than 10 minutes. There wasn't much to discuss. The signal had identified a position. The scans had confirmed a structure. The drill sat pointed directly at it. The only question left was simple. Do they continue? The answer came quickly. Of course they did. Curiosity had brought every one of them underground. Stopping now wasn't realistic. By 7:12 a.m. operations resumed. The tunnel filled with noise once more. The drill reactivated. Dust filled the air. Rock fragments cascaded along conveyor systems. Everything looked normal. Except for the monitor beside Jake. The signal file remained open. Still updating. Still changing. Not rapidly. Slowly. Like something patiently watching progress. Every few minutes a new sequence appeared. Not enough to decode. Not enough to understand. Just enough to remind everyone. Something was waiting ahead. 10 meters. The drill continued. 15. The anomaly grew clearer with every scan update. The smooth boundary now occupied nearly the entire display. It curved gently downward. Upward. Sideways. Too large to map completely. Rachel stood silently beside the scanner. Studying each update. The deeper they went, the less it resembled an object. And the more it resembled architecture. That thought made everyone uncomfortable. Natural formations didn't generate signals. Natural formations didn't draw diagrams. Natural formations didn't guide excavation. And natural formations definitely didn't appear designed. 18 meters. The call came from the drilling operator. The room grew noticeably quieter. Every eye moved toward the monitors. 19. The signal file updated again. This time the familiar 6-symbol sequence appeared by itself. Centered. Repeated 3 times. Then the update stopped completely. Jake frowned. For the first time in days, the file became still. As if waiting. The drill continued. 19.5 meters. 19.7. 19.9. Then, the resistance vanished. The sound changed instantly. Not impact. Not collapse. Absence. The drill surged forward unexpectedly. The operator killed power immediately. Machines wound down. Silence returned. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because they all knew. The drill had not broken through rock. It had broken through space. A camera was lowered first. Nobody wanted to advance blindly. The feed appeared on every monitor simultaneously. Darkness. Dust swirling through the beam. Nothing else. At first. Then the camera stabilized. And the room went silent. The void beyond the tunnel wasn't natural. It wasn't a cavity. It wasn't a geological formation. It was a chamber. A vast one. Perfectly smooth walls stretched beyond the limits of the light. The floor extended outward into darkness. The ceiling remained invisible. No fractures. No mineral deposits. No signs of natural processes. Just structure. Ancient. Silent. Impossible. Rachel stared at the screen. That's artificial. Nobody disagreed. Because there was no alternative explanation left. The signal file updated immediately. The 6-symbol sequence vanished. A new image appeared. Simple. Clean. A diagram of the chamber. Their tunnel connected to its edge. A single highlighted point glowed at the center. Exactly in the middle. Waiting. Jake felt another chill. The same one he'd experienced when the tunnel diagram first appeared. The signal wasn't surprised. It had expected this. The center marker pulsed slowly. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then stopped. The speakers crackled. Everyone jumped. The familiar 3-pulse signal returned. Only now. It was louder. Clearer. Stronger than ever before. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. The chamber answered. The sound didn't come through the mind systems. It came through the hole. Directly from the darkness beyond. The entire tunnel froze. Because for the first time, they weren't receiving a signal through equipment. They were hearing it. A real sound. A real transmission. Echoing from an impossible space hidden beneath Australia. Jake looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the chamber feed. Neither spoke. Because both had reached the same conclusion. The message had never been intended for the drill. It had never been intended for the computers. Or the speakers. Or the mine. The signal wasn't trying to escape. It wasn't broadcasting randomly. It wasn't searching. It was waiting. Waiting for someone to arrive. The center marker on the screen pulsed again. And deep in the darkness of the underground chamber, something responded. A faint blue light appeared. Very far away. Directly beneath the highlighted point. And then, slowly, very slowly, it began moving toward them. Nobody entered the chamber immediately. That would have been reckless. At least that was the official reason. The truth was simpler. Everybody was staring at the blue light. The light continued moving slowly through the darkness. Not quickly. Not threateningly. Deliberately. And the closer it came, the stranger the chamber became. The first estimates suggested the space was enormous. Now they knew those estimates had been too small. The chamber wasn't merely large. It was impossible. The laser mapping systems struggled to define the boundaries. Every scan returned different results. Different dimensions. Different volumes. Different depths. The shape remained stable. The measurements didn't. Rachel stood beside the display, watching the numbers update. Then update again. Then disagree with themselves. That shouldn't happen. Nobody argued. Nothing about this should have been happening. Yet here they were, half a kilometer underground, watching a blue light emerge from an impossible chamber. The signal speakers activated again. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Only now, a response came back. The chamber itself echoed. Not a reflection. A reply. The return pattern was slightly different. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. Silence. Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The signal had changed. Not repeated. Changed. The implication settled over the room immediately. Communication. Not broadcasting. Conversation. The blue light continued approaching. By now everyone could see it clearly. A sphere. Perfectly round. Soft blue illumination shining from within. No visible source. No mechanical parts. No obvious structure. Just light. Floating. One of the engineers swallowed. Drone. Rachel shook her head slowly. Maybe. But her voice carried very little confidence. Because drones obeyed known rules. This did not. The object glided effortlessly through the chamber. No visible propulsion. No movement through air. Just motion. Smooth. Controlled. Intentional. The closer it came, the more obvious another detail became. The sphere wasn't traveling randomly. It was following a path. An invisible route through the chamber. As though it already knew exactly where it was supposed to go. Exactly where they were. Jake looked at the monitor. The center marker remained active. The sphere's path aligned perfectly. That's what the marker was. Nobody answered. Because everyone already understood. The highlighted point had not indicated a destination. It had indicated an origin. The sphere finally reached the edge of the tunnel opening. Then stopped. The entire site went silent. Miners. Scientists. Engineers. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The sphere hovered motionless in front of them. Studying. Waiting. Not unlike the signal had. The moment stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Then, the sphere brightened. Not dramatically. Just enough. And the monitors exploded with activity. Every screen updated simultaneously. Data. Symbols. Diagrams. Thousands of updates appearing at once. Jake stared. The structured files were changing faster than ever before. Not chaotic. Organized. as if something had suddenly gained access to a much stronger connection. The speakers activated. This time, no pulses. A continuous tone. Low. Gentle. The sound filled the tunnel. Filled the chamber beyond it. And for the first time, the files began arranging themselves differently. The repeated 6-symbol sequence moved to the top. Then the bottom. Then the center. Always surrounded by new patterns. Rachel leaned forward. "Oh my God." Jake looked over. "What?" She pointed toward the file. The 6-symbol sequence wasn't appearing randomly anymore. The surrounding symbols changed constantly. The central sequence didn't. It remained exactly the same. Every time. Like a fixed point. Like an identifier. Or a name. The thought settled heavily over the room. The sphere floated silently near the tunnel. The files continued updating. And suddenly, for the first time since discovering the signal, nobody felt like they were looking at a machine. Machines transmitted information. Machines performed functions. Machines followed instructions. This felt different. The signal adapted. The files evolved. The sphere responded. And everything revolved around the same repeating sequence. Almost like a signature. Or an identity. The speaker tone ended abruptly. Silence returned. One final update appeared on the primary display. Not symbols. A diagram. Simple. Clear. The chamber. The tunnel. The sphere. And a highlighted path extending deeper into the darkness. Far beyond where the sphere had emerged. Jake stared at it. Rachel stared at it. Everyone stared at it. Because the message felt unmistakable. The sphere was not the source of the signal. It was only the first thing they were meant to find. And somewhere deeper within the impossible chamber, beyond the limits of their lights, beyond the limits of their scans, something much larger was waiting. The sphere rotated slowly. The blue light intensified. Then it began moving again. Not toward them. Back into the darkness. Following the highlighted path. As if expecting them to follow. The sphere moved deeper into the chamber. And after only a moment's hesitation, the team followed. Nobody ordered them to. Nobody voted. It simply happened. Curiosity had carried them this far. And somewhere ahead, the answers waited. Portable lights were deployed. Additional cameras activated. Communications relays positioned along the route. The operation became surprisingly methodical. Which felt absurd. Because nothing about this place was normal anymore. The chamber floor was perfectly smooth. No dust. No debris. No signs of age. That alone should have been impossible. The surrounding rock was ancient. Millions of years old. Yet the structure buried within it appeared untouched by time. The blue sphere glided steadily ahead. Never accelerating. Never slowing. As if it expected them to keep pace. Jake walked alongside Rachel, both staring into the darkness beyond the light. Any idea how old this place is? Rachel laughed softly. No idea. A pause. But older than the mine. A few people chuckled. The humor helped. A little. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. How long had this thing been down here? Centuries. Thousands of years. Longer. The question lingered as they continued deeper. Then the chamber changed. Not dramatically. Subtly. The walls began emitting a faint glow. Thin blue lines appearing beneath the surface. The same geometric patterns seen in the files. The same repeating structures. The same visual language. The moment the lights appeared, the sphere slowed. Then stopped. Directly ahead. A wide circular space opened before them. Far larger than anything they had seen so far. The floor dropped away slightly, creating a shallow basin. At its center stood something enormous. The entire group froze. At first glance, it looked like a structure. A tower. A monument. Then the light strengthened. And everyone realized they were wrong. It wasn't one object. It was thousands. Thousands of interconnected layers. Curving upward, outward, inward. Like an impossible crystal grown from mathematics itself. The formation rose nearly 30 meters above the chamber floor. Pale blue energy moved through its interior. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like blood through veins. Or information through a network. The sight left everyone speechless. Jake stared upward, trying to understand what he was looking at. Eventually he settled on the only honest answer. He had no idea. The sphere moved forward once more, approaching the base of the structure. The moment it arrived, the entire chamber responded. The walls brightened. The floor illuminated. The crystal structure awakened. Thousands of light pathways ignited simultaneously. The entire chamber transformed. Gasps echoed around the room. Because hidden beneath the crystal, beneath the geometry, something else appeared. Symbols. Millions of them. Flowing through the structure. The same characters they had been receiving in the files. The same patterns. The same language. Only now, the scale became clear. The files had never been messages. They were fragments. Tiny pieces of something vastly larger. Rachel stepped forward, eyes wide. Oh my God. Jake nodded slowly. Because he had reached the same conclusion. This wasn't a transmitter. It wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a communication device. It was a repository. A storage system. A library. The realization rolled through the group. Every symbol. Every sequence. Every file. Stored knowledge. Information. An archive. And judging by the size of it, a very large one. The crystal structure pulsed gently. Then something changed. A section near the center brightened. The symbols around it reorganized. Not randomly. Purposefully. Slowly arranging themselves into new patterns. The screens carried by the researchers immediately updated. The evolving files changed again. But this time, the symbols weren't growing. They were simplifying. Rachel stared at the display. The structure is adapting. Nobody questioned it. The evidence sat right in front of them. The impossible archive was changing itself. Adjusting. For them. The symbols continued reorganizing. Clusters merged. Others vanished. Complexity gave way to clarity. As if something was filtering information. Trying to find common ground. Trying to make itself understandable. The chamber fell silent. Except for the soft pulse moving through the crystal. A pulse that suddenly felt familiar. Not because they had heard it before. Because they finally understood what it was. The signal. Not a warning. Not an alert. A greeting. The blue sphere settled into a recess at the base of the structure. Perfectly. Like it was returning home. And somewhere within the crystal, something shifted. Not physically. Conceptually. The same feeling everyone had experienced since entering the chamber. The growing sensation that this place was not merely active. It was aware. Not alive. Not in the way humans understood life. But aware enough to adapt. Aware enough to respond. Aware enough to wait. And perhaps, most importantly, aware enough to learn. The crystal brightened once. The symbols reorganized again. Then a single sequence appeared on every display. Not thousands of symbols. Not pages of data. One line. Simple. Compact. The same 6-symbol sequence they had seen from the beginning. The one repeated in every file. The one buried in every transmission. The one that never changed. Jake looked up toward the glowing archive. And finally understood. It wasn't a code. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a marker. It had always been the same thing. A name. And for the first time, the library was introducing itself. The library had a name. That realization changed everything. Not because they could read it. Not yet. Because names implied identity. Identity implied purpose. And purpose implied choice. The archive was no longer a thing. It was something. The 6-symbol sequence remained visible across every display. Unchanging. The chamber glowed softly around them. Blue light moving through the vast crystal structure like rivers beneath ice. Jake stared upward, trying to comprehend the scale. The archive towered above them. 30 meters of geometry. Layers upon layers of information. And somehow, this was only the part they could see. Rachel broke the silence. It's introducing itself. Nobody argued. Because that's exactly what it felt like. Not a machine. An introduction. The crystal pulsed once. Immediately the displays updated. The 6-symbol sequence remained. Everything around it changed. The familiar symbols began reorganizing, simplifying, compressing. As if the archive had decided something. The change spread through every visible structure. Thousands of sequences vanished. Thousands more merged together. The complexity wasn't increasing. It was becoming easier to understand. Jake felt a chill. It's translating. Rachel looked over. Into what? He stared at the screen. I don't think it knows yet. That answer settled over the group. The archive wasn't translating information. It was learning how humans understood information. The distinction mattered. The crystal pulsed again. The symbols shifted further. Less alien. More familiar. The archive was adapting itself around them. Trying to build common ground. Trying to create a shared language. The blue sphere detached from the base of the structure. Floating slowly upward. Circling the archive. Every movement synchronized with the pulses flowing through the crystal. Jake watched carefully. Then a thought occurred. That's not a drone. Rachel glanced over. No. Jake pointed. That thing found us. A pause. It guided us here. The sphere continued circling. Silent. Purposeful. Then the chamber changed. Images appeared. Not projections. Not holograms. Concepts built from light. Stars. Worlds. Networks. The entire chamber dimmed as the display expanded. Gasps echoed through the room. Nobody needed translation for this. The meaning was obvious. The archive was showing them where it came from. Or who had built it. Hundreds of stars appeared. Then thousands. Connected by luminous pathways. A vast interstellar network. Jake felt suddenly very small. The display expanded further. Then something unexpected happened. The network began shrinking. Connections faded. Routes disappeared. Worlds darkened. The chamber fell silent. Because everyone understood. They weren't watching growth. They were watching loss. Something had happened. Long ago. The civilization that built the archive had once connected countless worlds. Now only fragments remained. The network continued fading until scattered points of light were all that remained. Memory. History. A civilization gone. Yet somehow, the archive remained. Waiting. The display shifted again. A new point appeared near the edge of the surviving network. Small. Bright. Immediately highlighted. Jake stared. Then slowly realized what he was looking at. It wasn't a star. It was a civilization. Rachel whispered the answer before anyone else. That's us. Nobody argued. The archive wasn't showing humanity a network. It was showing humanity its position within that network. For a moment the chamber remained silent. Then the 6-symbol sequence appeared again. And beside it, A second sequence. Shorter. Different. New. Jake felt his pulse quicken. The pattern was obvious now. The archive had introduced itself. Now it was trying to identify them, giving humanity a place within its records. A place beside civilizations separated by unimaginable distances. The thought hit harder than anything else so far. Because suddenly, the archive's purpose became clear. It wasn't waiting for its creators to return. It wasn't waiting for a specific species. It wasn't waiting for humans. The archive had been built for something simpler. Curiosity. Any civilization curious enough to dig deep enough. To ask questions long enough. To keep exploring when caution suggested stopping. The archive didn't care who found it. Only that someone eventually did. And now, for the first time in an unimaginable span of time, it wasn't alone anymore. The archive had introduced itself. Now it was trying to name them. And for the first time since the signal appeared, the team understood why the archive had waited so long. It wasn't waiting for a specific species. It wasn't waiting for its creators to return. It wasn't even waiting for humans. The archive had been built for something much simpler. Curiosity. Any civilization curious enough to dig deep enough. To ask questions long enough. To keep exploring when logic suggested stopping. The archive didn't care who found it. Only that someone eventually did. And now, for the first time in an unimaginable span of time, it wasn't alone anymore. The archive had been waiting. Not for humanity. Not for its creators. Not even for a specific civilization. It had been waiting for curiosity. That realization stayed with Jake long after the display faded. The crystal continued pulsing softly, blue light flowing through its immense structure. The 6-symbol sequence remained visible. Beside it, the newer sequence. Humanity's sequence. At least that was how everyone thought of it now. The archive had identified itself. Then identified them. Not as individuals. Not as a nation. As a civilization. Rachel stared at the glowing patterns. It's recording us. Nobody disagreed. Because every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The archive wasn't simply storing information. It was adding information. Updating itself. Expanding. The thought was strangely emotional. Somewhere in this impossible structure, humanity now existed as data. As history. As a story worth preserving. The blue sphere drifted away from the crystal. Floating slowly above the group. It paused. Then the displays changed again. This time the symbols disappeared completely. The chamber darkened. And a single image appeared. A planet. Not Earth. The surface looked unfamiliar. Different oceans. Different continents. Different colors. The archive highlighted it briefly. Then another appeared. And another. A dozen worlds. A dozen civilizations. None of them human. The realization rippled through the group. The archive wasn't unique because it contained knowledge. The archive was unique because it contained many histories. Many species. Many discoveries. Many journeys. The display expanded. Each world connected back to the same network. The same archive. The same purpose. Jake watched as one civilization after another appeared. Not detailed records. Moments. Discoveries. The first satellite above a world. The first deep ocean expedition. The first journey beyond a moon. The same pattern repeated again and again. Different species. Different worlds. The same curiosity. The same need to know what existed beyond the horizon. Rachel smiled slowly. It's not collecting technology. Jake nodded. It's collecting stories. The chamber brightened. The strongest response yet. For the first time, it felt as though the archive agreed. A new image formed. One world. One civilization. Highlighted. Humanity. The archive placed Earth's image beside the others. Equal. Not above them. Not below them. Beside them. That detail mattered. Nobody had been chosen. Nobody had been singled out. Humanity had simply joined a much older conversation. The crystal pulsed once. Then something unexpected happened. The images vanished. A single symbol appeared. Not the archive's name. Not humanity's identifier. Something new. The symbol repeated. Then again. Then transformed. Simplifying itself. The archive was trying something. Trying to communicate directly. The group watched silently. The symbol shifted several times. Then finally settled. A simple shape. A circle connected to a line. Not language. Meaning. Jake frowned. The symbol remained. Waiting. Then the archive highlighted humanity's sequence. The new symbol. Back to humanity. Again. And again. The pattern repeated. Rachel's eyes widened first. It's asking something. The room fell silent. Because she was right. The archive wasn't presenting information anymore. It was waiting for a response. For the first time since the signal appeared, the communication wasn't one way. It wasn't introducing itself. It wasn't teaching. It was asking a question. The symbol pulsed gently. Humanity. The symbol. Humanity. The symbol. Again. And again. A question. Repeated patiently. Not demanding. Not urgent. Waiting. The same way it had waited beneath the desert. For centuries. Perhaps far longer. Jake stared at the display. Trying to understand. Then something clicked. The archive wasn't asking who they were. It already knew that. It wasn't asking where they came from. It had already identified Earth. The question was something else. Something much bigger. The symbol pulsed again. Humanity. The symbol. And suddenly Jake understood. The archive wasn't asking what humanity knew. It was asking what humanity would contribute. The realization settled over the chamber. Heavy. Quiet. This was not a test. Not an examination. It was an invitation. Every civilization preserved within the archive had added something. Knowledge. Experience. Perspective. Now, for the first time, the archive wanted to know what humanity would bring. The crystal brightened softly. The question remained suspended before them. Patient. Waiting. And for the first time since discovering the signal, the team realized this was no longer about uncovering an ancient mystery. Nobody answered immediately. Because how do you answer a question from something older than recorded history? The symbol remained suspended above the archive. Softly glowing. Patient. Humanity. The symbol. Humanity. The symbol. Again. And again. The archive wasn't demanding an answer. It was waiting. The same way it had waited beneath the Australian desert. For centuries. Perhaps millennia. Jake stared at the display. Thinking. The archive wasn't asking for facts. It already possessed knowledge beyond anything humans had imagined. It wasn't asking for technology. It had survived longer than entire civilizations. Whatever the answer was, it had to be something different. Something uniquely human. The crystal pulsed softly. Rachel stepped forward. What if it isn't asking us to explain ourselves? Jake looked at her. What do you mean? She stared at the highlighted symbol. Every civilization contributed something. The display showing the other worlds glowed faintly behind her. Maybe it's asking what we want to contribute. Silence. Because that felt right. The archive had never tested intelligence. Never demanded proof. It had simply observed. Watching curiosity. Watching exploration. Watching discovery. The same traits repeated across every civilization it had shown them. The crystal brightened slightly. As if listening. Rachel took another step forward. The symbol remained. Waiting. Then she did something nobody expected. She picked up a tablet. Opened a blank screen. And began drawing. A simple line. Then another. Then another. The room watched. Confused. Jake frowned. "What are you doing?" Rachel smiled slightly. "Trying something." The drawing continued. A rough tunnel. The mine. The drill. The breakthrough. The sphere. The archive. The entire journey reduced to a simple sequence of images. Discovery. The image was uploaded to the display network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the archive responded. The symbol vanished. The crystal illuminated from within. Thousands of pathways ignited. The chamber filled with moving light. Gasps echoed around the room. Because the reaction was immediate. Powerful. The archive wasn't merely receiving the image. It was understanding it. The tunnel appeared above the crystal. The drill appeared. The breakthrough. The journey. Then, something remarkable happened. The archive added to it. The image expanded. Not replacing the story. Continuing it. The civilizations displayed earlier appeared beside humanity's story. Different worlds. Different species. The same sequence repeated. Discovery. Exploration. Curiosity. Again. And again. And again. The chamber brightened. The realization swept through the group. The archive wasn't collecting information. It was collecting experiences. Stories. The moment civilizations crossed into the unknown. The moments they chose curiosity over fear. Jake felt his pulse quicken. That was the answer. Not technology. Not knowledge. Curiosity itself. The archive had been preserving something far more valuable. Perspective. The crystal pulsed. Harder this time. The display expanded rapidly. The surviving network reappeared. World after world surrounding humanity's entry. Not a hierarchy. Not a ranking. A collection. Each civilization contributing a different way of seeing the universe. A different story. A different answer. The archive wasn't storing facts. It was protecting diversity of thought. The realization hit Jake like a physical force. The creators of the archive had understood something extraordinary. Knowledge could be lost. Worlds could disappear. Civilizations could vanish. But perspective was irreplaceable. The crystal glowed with brilliant blue light. The six-symbol sequence appeared one final time. The archive's name. Beside it, humanity's sequence. Equal. Side by side. The crystal brightened again. Then another sequence appeared. New. Unlike anything they had seen before. The chamber fell silent. The pattern didn't represent a civilization. It didn't represent a place. It represented a connection. The archive was updating itself. Humanity had been added. Not as a visitor. As a contributor. The realization washed across the room. For the first time in human history, the species had become part of something older than nations. Older than empires. Older than history itself. The question had been answered. Not with language. With action. With the same trait that had driven humanity across oceans. Across deserts. Into space. Curiosity. The crystal pulsed once. Softly. Like a heartbeat. And suddenly the room no longer felt like a tomb. Or a relic. Or even a library. It felt alive. Because after waiting an unimaginable length of time, the archive was growing again. And humanity had just become part of its next chapter. The archive was growing again. For the first time in an unimaginable span of time. It was no longer alone. The realization settled quietly over the chamber. Not triumph. Not celebration. Responsibility. Humanity had not discovered a treasure. Humanity had inherited a conversation. The crystal pulsed softly, blue light flowing through its vast structure. The archive sequence remained visible. Beside it, humanities. Equal. Side by side. Jake stared at them for a long moment. The simplicity felt important. The archive hadn't measured military strength. It hadn't measured wealth. It hadn't measured technology. It had measured something else. The willingness to keep asking questions. The willingness to keep searching. The willingness to keep digging. The crystal brightened. The blue sphere rose slowly into the air. For a moment it hovered above the group. Silent. Still. Then the archive changed one final time. The chamber darkened around them. The immense crystal faded from view. Not disappearing. Making room. A new display emerged. The network. Larger than before. Clearer than before. Stars connected by luminous pathways stretching across impossible distances. The surviving fragments of an ancient system. A system built by a civilization that no longer existed. Jake felt a strange sadness. The builders were gone. Yet their final creation remained. Waiting. Learning. Preserving. The archive pulsed gently. A single point in the network brightened. The first destination it had shown them. Then another appeared. And another. Not many. Only a handful. The nearest reachable paths. The next steps. Opportunities. Not instructions. Possibilities. The distinction mattered. The archive wasn't telling humanity where to go. It was showing humanity what existed. The choice remained theirs. Exactly as it always had. Rachel smiled softly. It's giving us a map. Jake shook his head. No. A pause. It's giving us a horizon. The crystal brightened instantly. The strongest response they had seen. The entire chamber filled with light. And somehow, everyone understood. The archive liked that answer. The network expanded. For a brief moment, the scale became overwhelming. Thousands of civilizations. Millions of journeys. Countless discoveries. All connected by the same simple idea. Someone looked beyond what they already knew. And decided to keep moving. The archive dimmed again. The stars faded gradually. The pathways disappeared. The destinations winked out one by one. Until only two symbols remained. The archive. Humanity. Side by side. The chamber fell silent. The blue sphere descended slowly, returning to its place within the crystal. The archive's pulse slowed. Not shutting down. Returning to rest. Its purpose fulfilled. The signal that had echoed through the mine was gone. The files stopped updating. The displays froze. The conversation had ended. At least for now. Jake looked around the chamber one final time. 5 days earlier, this place had been an impossible mystery beneath an opal mine. Now, it felt different. Familiar. Not because they understood it. Because it understood them. The team began the long walk back toward the tunnel. Nobody hurried. Nobody wanted to leave. But everyone knew they would return. Scientists. Engineers. Explorers. The archive had waited too long to be forgotten. Halfway back, Jake paused. Looking over his shoulder. The crystal glowed quietly in the darkness. Ancient. Patient. Waiting once more. Not for humanity. For the future. Months later, the discovery would change everything. Universities. Research institutes. Governments. All would send people to Coober Pedy. The opal mine would become the most studied location on Earth. Yet the archive never changed its behavior. It never gave orders. Never offered weapons. never solved humanity's problems. It simply listened. And occasionally, asked questions. Years later, children would learn about the archive in school. Not as the day humanity met aliens. Not as the day humanity found a machine. But as the day humanity learned it was part of something larger. The day curiosity became a shared language. And beneath the Australian desert, far below the red earth and ancient stone, the archive remained. Preserving stories. Preserving journeys. Preserving civilizations. Waiting for new questions. New discoveries. New horizons. Because the builders had understood something important. Knowledge mattered. Technology mattered. But neither was what carried civilizations forward. Curiosity did. And among all the entries within the ancient archive, humanity's first contribution was beautifully simple. We found a signal. And instead of turning away, we kept digging.